Sir, you start now because it's 1:30. Sir, unmute yourself. Sir, unmute yourself, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Khan,
Sir.
let us wait for another 2-3 minutes because people will be coming and will be admitting that will be coming onto my screen, disturbing it. Huh? We can wait for another 2-3 minutes.
We'll join slowly, sir. Let us listen.
Okay. So, welcome back to all those who are on the line now. We have been discussing on the web of life, and today I will want to discuss with you on how is a web of life related to the stability of the ecosystem. Now, we have been in the last 3 days or 2 days back, I was talking to you about web of life and ecosystem services. Let me give you a quick recap of what we discussed on that day. You may recollect that I took the example of a coffee cup and showed you how the web of life that goes into coffee cup itself is a huge and intricate relations among several elements of biological diversity in the coffee ecosystem. You may also recall that though a cup of coffee may have only coffee powder, chicory, sugar, and milk, if you take just the coffee powder, the production of coffee powder itself would involve hundreds of microorganisms and their interaction with themselves, among themselves and with the plant, hundreds of higher organisms such as insects, vertebrates, spiders, etc. And we concluded stating that every sip of coffee comes from the entire biodiversity of the coffee ecosystem in the sense that they all interact to give the coffee powder. We also now established another fact, that is, in the coffee ecosystem, if at all the ecosystem has to survive, there should be trees in the ecosystem, especially the shade trees. And we also now discussed that as the density of the shade trees increases, the impact of them on the rust will be now high, and rust can be controlled through the ants, and so the ecosystem does not collapse. Whereas if you remove the trees or if you reduce the trees in the coffee ecosystem, because that would lead to reduced ant population, which in turn will reduce to white fungus, the rust will take over and coffee ecosystem will be destroyed. In other words, we came to the conclusion that ecosystems are maintained by some specific components. Now, what I'll be doing today is give another example of how a tiny wasp could maintain an ecosystem stability of just not coffee ecosystem, but perhaps of the entire ecosystem that we live in. So in other words, stability of ecosystems can be maintained by any species, and any species could become critical to the ecosystem. And today we will discuss about how a tiny wasp can do this kind of task. To be precise, what I will show you is that the intricate ecological relations in fact constitute the foundation for the stability of the ecosystem. And so it is not that we only have to conserve the species. If we conserve the species, ecosystem will not survive. You know, conservation of species has been going on in several ways. One among them is bring a species and put into our botanical garden and say we have conserved it. But if you remove the species from its natural habitat, you will see how much the ecosystem suffers. And just maintaining the species and biodiversity in an artificial situation does not contribute to the survival or stability of the ecosystem. In fact, ecosystem is compared to the symphony in the musical concerts. As you know, sometimes several tens of musicians will be playing together, and that musical concert has to be in a close symphony, in a close association, or in a close harmony with each other. Even if a single musician in that musical concert plays the music differently from the others, you will see that the whole music gets destroyed. Ecosystem is also like that. It's like a musical concert. Each species is a musician playing in the symphony. And just as if one player or instrument player goes out of phase or does not follow others in the process of the symphony generation, the music gets out of order. Similarly, even if one species is out of phase, or if even one species does differently than what it should do, the system may completely collapse. The example that I'm going to give for that is, as I told, a wasp, a small wasp. And these wasps are actually the pollinators of figs. As you can see here, there are two images here, one of the male wasp and other is of the female wasp. And these are all the figs of Ficus mysorensis. And these wasps can sit on the fruit, or what we call the syconium of the ficus, and they are very, very small. In fact, some of these wasps are so tiny that you can put a couple of them even on the tip of the pin that we use to now clip the papers. Generally, when this syconium comes to maturity, meaning when the flowers inside the syconium come to maturity, they together produce a chemical. Actually, as you all know, syconium is a globe-like structure, and inside that globe-like structure, there are a number of flowers. And in one group of ficus called as monoecious ficus, all the flowers will be females. And when these female flowers come to maturity, that is when they are about to receive their pollen grains, together they emit a chemical. This chemical is a volatile chemical. 1 minute, there is something happening here, it's not moving right. Yes, this chemical is a volatile chemical, and the chemical produced by these syconia spreads or diffuses into the environment, and that chemical acts as an attractant to attract the wasps that actually pollinate this syconium. For instance, when this chemical is sensed by a wasp such as here, now that wasp starts moving towards the concentration of the chemical, focuses on, and eventually comes and sits on the syconium. Now like that, several species of wasps get attracted and they come and sit on the syconium. What they do, remember, these wasps that actually are attracted by the scent are female wasps, and their wings, and that's why they could fly and orient themselves and go towards the concentration or the increasing concentration of the chemical or volatile chemical, and so they can orient themselves onto the syconium that is producing this volatile chemical. So they come and sit on the syconium, and when they come and sit on the syconium, they have a very interesting instinct. That is, they try to now find the hole at the tip of the syconium. Every syconium, as most of the botanists would know, will have a hole or an entry point or a gateway into the syconium, and that is called oestiole. I'll come to that a little later. So all these wasps that land on the syconium tries to look for this entry hole and also try to get through that entry hole. As you can see here, two wasps are trying to get into the the entry hole. Now, if you happen to catch hold of these wasps at this moment, not letting them go inside, but pull them out and keep under the microscope and observe carefully, what you will see is very interesting. On either side of the thorax of these wasps, there are two baskets, and these baskets are filled with the pollen grains. As you can see here, these spherical objects are pollen grains, and this is the pollen basket in the left side of the thorax, and there is another on the right side of the thorax. So these pollen grains are actually loaded onto this pollen basket, and these flies are actually carrying those pollen grains from elsewhere. Where are they carrying it from? I'll tell you a little later. So they are pollen laden. They try to get inside the syconium. Now, this is the syconium, and that is the ostiole that you see here are the entry hole. Actually, this entry hole is like a series of tongues focusing or orienting towards inside of the syconium. That is the entry point. And as you can see here, there are tongue-like structures, bracts, which are actually orienting towards inside of the syconium. Why are they orienting towards inside? So that when the wasps enter through this hole and when they get into the syconium, they are trapped inside. They can never get out of this syconium. So in other words, this syconium that has attracted the wasps and into which the wasps have entered is a kind of a trap. It's a trap from where these wasps can never escape. Note that they had wings. But now even if they have wings, it's of no use because they anyway cannot fly out of the syconium. Now, as I told, all the flowers that are inside the syconium at this stage are female flowers. And they are all lined along the internal rind of the syconium. And they have three distinct structures. One is the stalk, other is the ovule, and the style and the stigma. The style and the stigma are all exposed inside in a spherical shape. As you can see here, the stigmas are exposed inside, and this is the ostiole. So the wasp that gets inside is now carrying the pollen grains with it. Now all these flowers that are lining inside the rind are all female flowers. Note that I told the wasp that gets into the syconium is also a female wasp, and the flowers inside the syconium are also the female flowers. So the entire world as of now is a female world. Female wasp, female flowers, and no male flowers and no male wasps. Now observe the wasp entering into the syconium from that hole or ostiole. As the wasp enters inside, it has got wings as I told, but it wriggles through those tongue-like bracts. And as it wriggles through those tongue-like bracts, what happens is because of the force that this tongue-like bracts hold the wasp as it pierces through, the wasp will be now devoid of the wings. The wings are removed. They are held up on the tongue of syconium. So the wingless wasp with the pollen grains gets into the syconium and it lands on these female flowers, especially at the surface of the stigma of the female flowers. Now here is what happens inside the syconium. This is the spherical shape created by the stigmas of all these female flowers, and that is a female wasp. It has pollen grains in its thoracic basket, and it does two things simultaneously when it is inside this syconium. Note that inside the syconium, the world is dark. No light can enter because it's a closed world. And so wasp cannot see what is there inside. What it does is that it now takes out its forelegs, pulls the pollen grains from the thoracic basket, pulls them out and sprays on to the female flowers and literally pollinating the stigmas or pollinating the flowers inside the dark world. At the same time, it does another thing. Look at this wasp here. There is a black stick-like structure on the back of the wasp, and that is the ovipositor. What it does is that it takes out this ovipositor and senses the stigma, feels for the style, gets into the flower, and through the style, it lays an eggs into each flower. Note that a wasp can find out if there is already an egg into in a ovule, and if it is already, it's already got a egg inside, it does not super parasitize. It only lays one egg into each flower. So like that, all the flowers, not all the flowers, some of the flowers receive the eggs of the wasps, and that process of oviposition goes on randomly inside the syconium, randomly because as and when the wasp probes through its its ovipositor, whichever the flowers it encounters, it lays eggs into it. In that sense, it is very random. So on one hand, it pollinates by sprinkling the pollen grains, and the other hand, it oviposits into the flowers. What happens? All these flowers into which the wasp has oviposited, the eggs hatch and they develop, the larva comes out. Larva begins to eat on the larva, on the, ovary or ovules, and the larva starts developing and eventually becomes a fresh wasp or a new generation wasp. And those flowers in which this wasp develop are called galls. However, note that not all flowers are oviposited. Some are left free and pollen grains are there on their stigma. These pollen grains grow down, they fertilize and they become seeds. So here is what is happening inside the syconium. The female wasps have gotten in, they have laid their eggs and also they have pollinated. After some time, all those flowers in which the wasp has laid the egg and larva has developed into the wasp, which I told are called galls, from them new generation of wasps begin to emerge. When this new generation of wasps begin to emerge, there are two kinds of wasps that come about. Most of them are female wasps that are winged, and some of them are male wasps that are not having wings. Actually, it is the male wasps that are first to come out. Male wasps which have strong mandibles and which do not have wings are the first to come out. Because they have got strong mandibles, they can cut open the gall in which they are growing. As you can see, the gall is removed here by its pressure. And so once the the cap is removed, so once the cap of the gall is removed, the male comes out. It goes in search of the other galls where females are developing. It pulls out the females, mates with them, and then goes in search of another female. Like that, it goes on mating with all the females. Note that the females do not have strong mandibles, and so they cannot come out on their own. They require the help of the male to now remove the cap of the gall, and the male, by removing the cap of the gall, pulls out the female and mates. So the next generation of the wasp can only emerge if the males are there. But how many males are there and how many females are there? Surprisingly, in the entire population of this new generation of wasps, there will be just about a couple or maximum about 5 or 6 male wasps. Rest all hundreds of them are female wasps. So there are female wasps now developing in some which are now pulled out by the male wasps and they are mated. And as you can see here, these are the galls in which the wasps are developing, and these are the seeds. This is again a wasp. You can see very clearly the wasps as a dark structure, and seeds are developing in other ovules. So there are two kinds of ovules here. One seed forming ovule and the wasp forming ovule. Wasp forming ovules are those into which the mother wasp has laid eggs, and seed wasps are those into which the mother wasp has not laid the eggs but are pollinated. So these give rise to seeds and these give rise to wasps. As I told, the male wasps have come out and female wasps have also come out. Female wasps are now mated. What happens now is very, very interesting. Male wasps that come out and pull out the females and mate with them do not get out of the syconium at all. What they do is that these male wasps go to the top of the syconium, make a bore through the rind of the syconium, thus create an exit hole. Remember, the whole syconium is closed and nothing can escape out of it because the bracts are all lining inside, and bracts are also very much dried now. So they have no way to escape out. And so male wasp goes to the tip of the rind, bores like a borewell is dug into the soil, and they create an exit hole. The moment oxygen gets into this syconium through this exit hole, these male wasps are sensitive to high level of oxygen and they almost become sedated, and in fact they die inside the syconium. They will never see the light of the day. Their whole task is emerge, pull out the females, mate with them, make a bore on the top and die. And that is all their task. But female wasps are now mated. They are now ready to escape. The hole is already there. And through the hole, the moment oxygen gets in, the carbon dioxide concentration inside the syconium goes down. And so the females become very active now. And now they are ready to get out. But before getting out, as I told already, the male flowers are now forming. So far, there were no male flowers. The female wasps gather the pollen grains from the male flowers, load them onto their pollen basket, and once they have loaded the pollen grains onto pollen basket, once they are ready to now fly, they get out of this exit hole and fly out. And where do they go out? Now, recollect back that there will be somewhere some syconium emitting that pheromone, and they are attracted to that pheromone, and they go and land on that syconium, and again they now lay the eggs and also pollinate the flowers. The whole cycle continues. Thus, the figs are, in other words, pollinated by these pollinating wasps called eugenid wasps. And what is interesting is that there are about 700 to 800 species of figs. Each species of fig has a specific pollinator wasp. The association between a particular species of fig and a particular species of wasp is so tight that there is always one-to-one relation, and the errors are very, very rare. So if a wasp of one species of fig enters into another species, a syconium of another species, it may not be able to pollinate because, first of all, it cannot enter. First of all, it won't be attracted by that new different species. And even if, let us say, it goes and accidentally it sits on, it cannot enter. And even if it enters, the pollen grains will not grow on that other species. So there is one-to-one relation between the fig and the pollinator. So much so that if you know the taxonomy of the figs, you can also reconstruct the taxonomy of the wasps. And that is the level of association. Now, we found that wasps enter the syconium, the female wasp enter the syconium, lays the eggs and lays the pollinates it, and the new wasps come about, new seeds come about. How many days it takes? The entire cycle takes generally about 30 days. What is also important is that when you go and visit any ficus tree, almost all the syconia in the tree will be in a common stage or a very defined stage. Any single tree shows a very strong level of synchrony in the flowering, meaning if there is a tree, all the syconia in that will be in the very early stage where wasp can enter in, or maturing stage where wasps have entered and they have laid the eggs and pollination has happened, or in the mature stage where the male wasps are coming out and trying to mate with the females, or completely ripened stage where female wasps with the pollen laden baskets are ready to emerge out. So all the syconia will be in the same stage. There is a kind of synchrony among the syconia in any given tree. So given that most syconia in a tree are in one stage, there is a problem. What is the problem? If a wasp gets out of any syconium with the pollen grains, for it to enter into another syconium, there won't be syconia on the same tree, and that wasp has to find another tree. Which means there should be another tree now producing the fresh syconia so that the wasp can go and enter into that. And how long would this process go on? As I told, the time span between the entry of the wasp and the emergence of the wasp is 30 days. That is, if on January 1st, the female wasp enters into the syconium, the whole process of laying the eggs, ovipositing, and the new generation of wasps coming out and pollen gathering and then exiting from the syconia takes about 30 days. This is not essentially 30 days always, it depends on the species, but in general it's about 20, 25 or 30 days depending on the species. Let us say it is 30 days. After 30 days, new generation of wasps are coming out of the syconium, and when the new generation of wasps are coming out, they have to find another tree where there are fresh syconia, because on the same tree there won't be fresh syconia as there is a lot of synchrony among the syconia in the same tree. Now where is that new tree? We do not know. But there should be a tree that receives or that is ready to receive these wasps. Now, as a consequence, As I told, this whole cycle takes about 30 days. As a consequence, there is something that is happening very interesting. What is that? Let us say on January 1st, wasp enters into the syconium. And as I told, 30 days later, wasps emerge out. When wasps emerge out, there should be another tree that is having the fresh syconia to receive these wasps. So on February 1st, there should be another tree which receives these wasps. And when do the wasps come out of this tree? They come out on 30th of February or 29th of February. So on 30th of February, when they come out, now those wasps again have to enter into fresh syconium, and
sir, you unmute. You have got mute.
hello.
Yeah, now it is okay, sir.
Yeah. At what point you did not hear?
About February you are talking.
Pardon?
From February month you are talking.
Okay. So on January 1st, wasps enter. On January 30th, wasps get out. Those wasps that get out on January 30th, they have to enter on February 1st into the new syconia. That means a new tree should be producing the fresh syconia. Now from that new tree, wasps again emerge out on 30th February. And those wasps that emerge out on 30th February have to enter into a new syconium, which means they have to now have another tree which produces fresh syconia on March 1st. And so it goes on and on. You will see that every month there should be some tree somewhere in the ecosystem producing fresh syconia. And at the same time, there will be some tree which is actually releasing the wasp. That means they are actually producing the ripened syconia. So population of wasps need to be maintained throughout the year by this kind of continuous production of the fresh syconia on different species altogether. So some tree within the ecosystem should be in flower at any given moment of time, so that any wasps that are now released into the ecosystem should be now actually able to find entry or new syconia. What happens if this does not happen? If this does not happen, the wasps that have come out will not be able to find fresh syconia. That means the chain of this pollination breaks, and if the chain of this pollination breaks, the mutualism breaks, and if the mutualism breaks, figs cannot survive, wasps cannot survive. So at any given moment of time, there should be some tree which is always producing fresh syconia. Thus, figs should be flowering and fruiting throughout the entire year because of this reason. What happens as a consequence? Even in odd season, when there is no other tree having any fruits at all in its branches, there will be some ficus somewhere in the ecosystem that will be producing fruits that emit the wasps. As a result, even in the odd season, animals can depend on these fruits for their survival as a food source, which means when no other plant is capable of providing food to the animals in any odd season, there will be somewhere for sure some ficus tree producing fruits that provide food for the animals. So the squirrels, the monkeys, even elephants sometimes, or the birds, or deers, all animals can now find their food resources in the odd seasons through the ficus fruits. So in other words, figs bear fruits throughout the season for their own survival. What do you mean by their own survival? If they don't produce the fruits, their pollination chain is cut off. And so for them to survive, they should produce the fruits. And all other animals depend on these fruits for their survival. So while the ficus trees produce fresh fruits every month for their own survival, animals eat on them and survive on their own using these ficus fruits. So without fig trees, what happens? Most of the animals may face population decline. If the food is not there in our season, their survival may be affected, so they might die. So as the animals begin to die, be it a pollinator like a bird or a deer, which is a defoliator, or monkeys or squirrels. So when all the animals begin to die, the ecosystem collapses. In other words, survival of the animals in the ecosystem is contingent upon the production of fruits by the figs, and thus fig trees seem to be keeping the ecosystem in a balance, and therefore fig trees are called as the keystone species. What is a keystone? Keystone, as you can see in the diagram here, is a central stone in an arc around a window or on a door, and if you remove this keystone, the entire arc collapses, and so the roof collapses. So the stability of the house or the roof is maintained by this keystone. Similarly, ficus species maintain the balance of the ecosystem or the stability of the ecosystem by producing fruits throughout the year and by providing food to the animals throughout the year. And so the ficus plants are the keystone species of the entire ecosystem. Now, a small diversion here. What is the diversion? You all know that in India, and it's not just in India, even in Iran and Iraq, people have recorded that ficus is highly revered, highly worshipped. People did not know why ficus is so much worshipped. In fact, in every village, there will be a ficus tree, one or other species. Now, there is also a Bhagavad Gita shloka that shows that Krishna tells that just as the ficus is greatest among all the trees, I am the greatest among all the gods. Or, like Narada is the greatest among all sages, and ficus is a great tree among all the trees. I am the greatest among all lords. Now look at why possibly this ficus is compared as the greatest trees among all the trees. Ashvattaha sarvarukshanam devarshinam cha naradaha. Just as the Narada is greatest among all sages, Ashvattaha sarvarukshanam, the Ashoka tree, the Ashwatha, that is ficus tree, is among all the trees. Why should that be? And why should that have also led to the cultivation of ficus trees in every village? Probably because maintaining several hundreds of species of ficus helps maintaining this fruit production throughout the ecosystem, so that animal population is maintained, the ecosystem stability is maintained. And so without perhaps providing all these details, somewhere somehow human knowledge has accumulated the observation that ficus are important for the ecosystem, and so perhaps there is this cultivation of the ficus trees. The small question here. I told ficus is the keystone species. The question is, what is actually keystone? It is a ficus tree, or the wasp that pollinates, or the interaction between the wasp and the fig tree. You will see that without the wasp, ficus cannot survive. Without the ficus, wasp cannot survive. Both of them are surviving based, depending on each other through this pollination mechanism or mutualistic interaction called the fig-wasp mutualism. And so in my view, the actual keystone is not either of the species, but the interaction between both of them, that is the pollination mechanism. Now let us shift our gears and come back to our original point. Thus you will see that the stability of the ecosystem is maintained by this intricate, very soft or very, soft interaction between the wasp and the ficus, and this pollination between the two is responsible for maintaining the ecosystem. So we have seen so far 2 or 3 things. One is the products we derive from the ecosystem. For example, the coffee comes from a wide range of interactions, as we discussed in the last class. And today we found that the ecosystem stability in which we live is from a tiny wasp or a fig, or an interaction between both of them, that is a fig-wasp mutualism. Now, what maintains this fig-wasp mutualism is another level of understanding the web of life. How is this mutualism maintained? Who is responsible? Who actually is regulating this whole mutualism? Is it the plant that is now driving the whole mutualism, or it is the insect that is the pollinator, that is the wasp that is maintaining? So you see, in the web of life, we can now come down from an ecosystem level to a product level, or also even to the interaction level. And how is this interaction maintained is also a part of understanding the web of life. Let us move on to that now. Now, how did mutualism evolve? If you now go into Darwin's world, you will see that it is very difficult to explain mutualism. Why? Because Darwin's world speaks about full of competition and selfishness. In fact, the very basic assumption of Darwinism is that organisms fight among themselves, struggle among themselves, become the best among them, and to survive. So the basic tenet of Darwinism is competition, selfishness, greediness, and struggle for existence. And there is no scope for helping others here. Helping others is remote in the arena of Darwinian theory. However, a scientist called Kropotkin, he proposed that the world is not full of competition. In fact, it is filled with cooperation. And because of cooperation only, there are so many organisms, so many interactions, and so much of life existing around the world. Unfortunately, Kropotkin could not explain the entire gamut of life using his argument. Whereas, as we know, evolutionary theory proposed by Darwin can explain purely by that, origin of species by natural selection, the entire gamut of life, or you could explain the evolution of the entire gamut of life on the surface of the earth. As a result, it appears that if you want to now understand how mutualism has evolved, we need to now look at the evolution of mutualism through the glasses of Darwinism. How can we explain that? And this is Kropotkin, and that is Darwin. Now, I like to get back to 2 or 3 slides that I discussed with you in the last class. You may recollect that I started off telling about, defining the interspecific interactions with the 2 partners, partner A and partner B. And I also told that each of this partner will have benefits and the costs. For instance, the plant gets the benefit of getting pollinated by the insect, and it also bears the cost or invests in the cost in terms of producing nectar and pollen grain. And if the benefit to cost ratio to the plant is more than 1, we say plant is gaining because benefit is more than the cost. And at the same time, the insect also is investing and also getting benefit. What is it getting the benefit? It's getting the benefit of nectar and pollen. And what is the cost it incurs? It has to travel from one plant to other carrying the pollen grain. So there is a transportation cost, as I was telling in the last class. And so there is a benefit to cost to the insect also. If this benefit to cost ratio is more than 1 for the insect, we say insect is also gaining. And so we can now see that all interactions can be now explained between as a dimension of benefit and cost between 2 partners. Now, these benefits and costs, I told you in the last class, have to be viewed as evolutionary gains and not simply as the weight of nectar or the energy spent in transportation, etc. They have to be converted into the reproductive gains that each of the partner gets. I also made a 3rd point, that is the benefit to cost ratio can range from 0 to infinity. How is that? Let us say benefit that an organism gets by interacting with another species is 0, whereas there is some cost of interaction, then B by C is 0. However, if benefit is more and cost is 0, the B by C will be infinite. So there is a range from 0 to infinity in terms of benefit to cost. I also drew a space between B by C for plants and insects and divided the whole space into 4 quadrants. I showed you that the first quadrant represents competition. I would not like to the details because we have discussed in the last class. And the second quadrant is antagonism, where insect gains because it now eats the insects, the insectivorous plants. And the third quadrant is antagonism, where the insect gains, not the plant, because the insect eats the plant, and that is the antagonism where herbivores fall. And there is also commensalism here, and finally the mutualism. I showed that this mutualism is the most interesting of the whole of these interactions, and all the interactions can be put onto this space. Now, what I want you to observe here is something that I did not tell in the last class. What is that I did not tell? Note that mutualism is lined by the side of antagonistic interactions on either side by a very, very thin line called commensalism. Meaning, mutualism can sometimes shift it to antagonism, or antagonism can sometimes shift into mutualism with small modifications in the benefit to costs. Number one. Number two, I told the entire Darwinian world is competition and antagonistic interactions, struggle for existence, no scope for helping each other. But then how does mutualism evolve? In what way mutualism can be explained in a Darwinian way? Or is mutualism really a false metaphor that we are using for the actual selfish competitive interactions among the species? You will see today, in the next 15 to 20 minutes, I will show that in fact, there is no mutualism in strict sense. What is that? Incidentally, if you now take this mutualism space where the benefit to cost ratio to both the participants are more than one, there are a number of these mutualistic interactions. Soil burrowing ants. What do? They burrow the soil by the side of the tree, the plant, and so by burrowing, they also now create air space at the root zone, helping the plant. But the plant also gets some help, some benefit, because it will be now moving on the plant and goes and eats on the insects on the plant. Non-pugnacious ant visitors, again a similar kind of relation where they actually go and live on the plants for space. Pollinators, seed dispersers, or ant acacia like coevolution, all of them can be put into this space here. And the most highly mutualistic interactions are falling at the top of it, where benefit to cost ratio for both plants and insects are very, very high, and fig wasp mutualism falls at the top of this. So coming back to what I told, mutualism seems to be a continuum of Darwinian domain of competition. And in fact, there is a thin line between mutualism and exploitation or competition or antagonistic interactions. And fig wasp mutualism is also one such mutualistic interaction, which we call mutualism in a Darwinian domain. But is it really mutualism? Let us see. Now let us go back to this story where I told that the wasp that gets into the syconium does two things. What is that? One, it pollinates, and two, it gets into the flowers. The act of pollination brings benefit to the plant because it is getting pollinated, but the oviposition is costing to the plant because some of the ovules are actually taken away by the wasp for the production of its own offspring. That is a new generation of wasps. So there is on one hand benefit to the plant in terms of pollen grains it receives, and at the same time there is a cost to the plant in terms of the number of ovules that are oviposited by the mother wasp. So there are two components of pollination. One is seeds are produced, which is the benefit to the plant, and wasps are also produced, which is cost to the plant. Now you will see that every organism in a Darwinian sense will be now trying to increase its own benefits to the cost it is increasing. And so plant will be now always selected to increase its benefits, that is the production of seeds, and reduce the cost it incurs, that is the production of wasps. However, at the same time, note that for the wasp, what is cost to the plant becomes benefit to the wasp, because more the flowers it oviposits, more the offspring to the wasp, and so that is benefit to the wasp. And more the flowers it has to pollinate, so much extra energy it has to spend, and that is cost to the ovipositor or the wasp. So you see that what is benefit to the plant is cost to the wasp. What is cost to the plant is a benefit to the wasp. So there will be always a tug of war between the wasp and the plant to increase their respective benefits. While plant wants to increase the seed production, wasp would like to increase the wasp production. So there is a continuous fight for the ovules to be allocated into the seed production or into the wasp production. Now, who is winning in this whole process? Who wins depends on who regulates the whole process. Who is in control of all this? Is it the plant or is it the wasp? Now, this question was answered by Galil and Eiskowitz in 1960s by telling or by showing that eventually plant is regulating the whole process. And how can the plant regulate the whole process? They proposed a very, very simple hypothesis. The hypothesis is that they proposed or they told that plant produces two kinds of flowers. One is the short style, another is long style. As you can see here, this flower in the middle has a long stalk and a short style. The style is above the ovary, whereas the flower on the left-hand side has a very short stalk and long style. So they told that all those flowers which have got a short style can be now reached by the ovipositor of the wasp, and so they can lay eggs into them, and so all short-styled flowers develop into new generation wasps. Whereas the long-styled flowers, because their style is very long, the wasp's ovipositor cannot reach them, and so they are left to develop into seed, and so they develop into seeds. This they called as style length dimorphism. Dimorphs. There are two kinds of forms or shapes of the styles in terms of the length of the style. One is short style and there is long style. Short style develop into wasp and short style develop into wasp and long style develop into seed. This is the mechanism they proposed. But is it true? Now, someone in my lab wanted to test this hypothesis. How do you test this? You see that if at all, as Galil and Eiskowitz have told, that there are two kinds of lengths of the flowers, then when we measure the length of these flowers, then we should get two different kinds of styles. One having long style, other having short style. And if we distribute their style lengths along their lengths, numbers of flowers along their style lengths, we should get two kinds of distributions in the length of the style or style length. One is short style, another is long style. So what is expected is a bimodal distribution of styles, because there is style length dimorphism. Two types of styles are there. That's what Eiskowitz and Galil told. So we should expect a bimodal distribution of style lengths. So one of my students actually went to study this and measure the style lengths of all the flowers in several syconia in a given species, and what she found was surprisingly not a bimodal distribution but a unimodal distribution of the styles. As you can see here, when she plotted the number of flowers with varying length of styles, she did not get a bimodal distribution, she get a single mode, which means, as Galil and Eiskowitz told, there are no two kinds of flowers. All have got one average length of style, which is not neither long nor short. This was true either in Ficus bengalensis or virens or mysurensis or racemosa or religiosa. In some 18 species that we studied, this was true. What was true? There are no two modes, there is only one mode, and it is normal distribution. Which means, if at all the style length is limiting the laying of the eggs, that is not true. However, one can argue the following. What is that? The style lengths need not be bimodal, but if the ovipositor cannot reach some of the lengths of these styles, then all of them become short style with respect to the length of the ovipositor, and those it cannot reach become the long style. Okay, in other words, if this is this style length, if this is the ovipositor length as shown by the arrow here, all those flowers whose style length is less than the length of the ovipositor of the insect can be reached by the ovipositor or the insects, and so they all will be laid by with the eggs, and the rest will escape oviposition, and so they develop into seeds. So in other words, there is no need for style length dimorphism, and uniform distribution itself is enough, provided this ovipositor length is not capable of reaching all the flowers. This was one of the arguments. as you can see here, if the style length is very long only, it can reach the long style flowers. And so the proposal is that the ovipositor length is limited in its length. And so there are two kinds of flower. This was the argument. Let me skip all this. So the dimorphic style length hypothesis suggests that styles are normally distributed and there are long and short style flowers. However, our data showed that there are no short and long style flowers. There is only one kind of flower. Ovipositors are long enough and we also found one thing. What is that? The length of the ovipositor of all the wasps in their respective species is capable of laying eggs into all the flowers, which means all flowers can be now reached by the ovipositor to lay the eggs, which means plant is not under the control, is not controlling this mutualistic relations. All ovules are accessible to wasp and wasp only should now regulate the mutualism. I'll skip all this. I only will like to now tell you eventually that it turns out that we still don't know how the fig wasp mutualism is regulated, and all those youngsters who are listening to the talk today can perhaps now go back and study the fig wasp mutualism and seek your own answers as to how and in what mechanism the fig wasp mutualism is now sustained. I will not go into the details because we have our own mechanism to explain. I would not like to know perhaps corrupt the thinking of the young visitors, young listeners here. Perhaps you can now go back and actually examine yourself if there is some way where you can actually explain the maintenance of mutualism in fig wasps. The reason I told so far this story is to now tell you all that all is not complete in the area of web of life. There are a number of things that we need to discover. This is one among them. What is that? How is that the fig wasp mutualism is maintained? Who is regulating it? Whether it is the plant or the insect, we have no answer. Now let me come to the last slide of my talk, and this is about how mutualism persists. Now let us go back to the benefit to cost ratio of the plant and the insect, the two partners. Let us say there is a system at this point. What is the meaning of this? Plant is getting so much of benefit and insect is getting so much of benefit. But can this mutualistic interaction that we call mutualism can be reverted and can it go back to the antagonistic interaction? Remember, antagonistic interactions are here and in the base. Now, evolutionarily, what we can expect is that insect will be always trying to increase its own benefit to cost ratio, which means the system is pulled towards this side. Similarly, plant will also be trying to increase its own benefit to cost ratio. So it incorporates all the changes or adaptations in the system that increase its own benefit to cost ratio. As a result, while insect is pushing the system to this side, plant is pushing it to this side. As a result, as a vector between the two, the system will always be proceeding along this line, which means once the mutualistic interaction gets established, they cannot escape from that. If anything, they always move towards most highly mutualistic interactions. And so mutualistic interactions is actually a trap. But note that within this trap, there is selfishness on the plant and also on the insect. What is the selfishness? Plant is trying to increase its own fitness or benefit to cost ratio, and insect is also trying to increase its own benefit to cost ratio. As a result, the mutualism is visible to us as a highly mutualistic interaction. It is not because of cooperation, it's because of their selfishness, their greed, their competitiveness, their struggle for increasing their own fitness. Thus, mutualism is not actually a mutualism. It is an evolutionary tug of war between the partners. There is more competition than cooperation in mutualism. Thus, mutualism is a misnomer, and we perhaps have to now understand that mutualism is a term that we have given, while in actuality, it is the process of individual partner trying to increase their own fitness, and as a result, we now see that as a mutualistic interaction. And I will stop here. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to now take them. Dr. Khan?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Let participants raise questions if they have any or doubts if there are any. I will stop here.
Please, participants, you can interact with sir, or at least you can put in chat box.
Sure. Any question can be raised. Don't hesitate. Any of you have any questions, you can raise them.
Sir, when we talk about ecosystem services,
Yeah.
how this term has come, or who coined this term, or how this concept, how it is conceptualized actually, ecosystem services?
Ecosystem services, in fact, I will not try to give a textbook definition and a textbook classification of that. There are 4 kinds of ecosystem services. One is the products. Other is the indirect services like water. Products are, food, oil, protein, the biological material that we harvest, medicinal plants or medicine, etc. The indirect or tangential benefit are water, oxygen, air, pollution control. These are the tangential benefits. The third is services, such as cleaning the ecosystem using, for instance, pollination is a service, or maintaining the ecosystem in healthy condition by these scavengers that eat away the dung and clean the ecosystem. That's the third level. And the fourth level is maintaining the ecosystem balance and all that. So there are any kinds of any number of ways in which one can divide the ecosystem service. Mostly these are the 4 different categories: direct food and matter or biological material, the indirect contributions, and then as I told, the services and the ecosystem stability. Now, these are actually evolving. I should say the ecosystem service concept is just evolving. People are only trying to realize now that the so-called biodiversity we were talking about has no meaning unless it is attached with all other services or this kind of help that we are deriving from the ecosystem. The participants, if they want to now know about this classification, the different users, for instance, people have shown that every year the ecosystem services contribute to 300 and odd trillion dollars worth of ecosystem services to the human population, which is more than the GDP of entire American continent put together every year. These are all values attached, but I don't give much weightage to these values because these values change depending upon we now give weightage to individual services. But it is true that without these ecosystem services, we are nothing. In the next class, I'll be now telling how, because of the these ecosystem components, how our own survival is sometimes becomes subject of sensitive issue. I'll talk about it in the next class.
Sir, there are 2 questions with participants. First question is, is there any specificity of wasp to ficus species?
What is the question? Let me read that. Is that there, sir, any specificity of wasp? Yes, you seem to have missed the point. Yeah, I read the question. Yes, there is a specificity. I told for every ficus species, there is a pollinating wasp species. Pollinator of one species of ficus does not pollinate or get into the syconium of the other species. So much so, this one-to-one relation is so strong that people who now write down the taxonomy of the ficus can also write down the taxonomy of the pollinating wasps. So there is a specificity, high level of specificity. And the second question is how pollination takes place in orchids. In pollination in orchids, I'm sure in the next talk also Dr. Belavadi is going to talk to you on some of these things. But just to answer, in orchids, the pollination is by some wasps, some bees, and sometimes even by some birds. Dr. Belavadi would provide perhaps more details on this. In orchids, for instance, there are some orchids where the flower resembles almost like a female wasp of a particular species of wasp. Male wasps look at that flower and go and try to mate with that flower, hoping it is a female wasp. And in the process, they execute pollination. So there are very interesting systems in orchids of pollination, in pollination. Any other questions? So fine, Dr. Khan.
Sir, 1 second, sir.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon. Yeah, sir. Please. Sir, any particular stage of insect is able to sense their host plant? Is there any? I mean to say there will be various I mean to say, stages in the life cycle. So, which part of
Now this adult female, in this case of the figuous mutualism, the adult females that get out of the syconium are capable of sensing the volatile chemical and orienting themselves towards the host plant. And it depends on the kind of interaction that occur. You know, there are situations where, in fact, yesterday, remember, in the another talk I was talking about how only the female, gravid females can sense the pheromone emitted by the ants. The pheromone that is emitted by the ants to warn their own colleagues, that is sensed by the gravid females of a beetle. Whereas the males and ordinary females cannot sense that pheromone. So it all depends on what is the kind of interaction, what species are involved in the web of life, etc.
Sir, there is one more question. Why in some flowering plants pollination fails?
Why in some flowering plants pollination fails? Well, there are a number of reasons. One is lack of pollinator. Number two, lack of the suitable pollen grains. Among plants also sometimes there are these compatible pollen grain genetic systems. So only when the pollen grains come from a pin system to long style system, the pollen grains can grow. There's pin and thumb system. If the pin pollen grain falls on the pin stigma, they won't grow. If the thumb pollen grain fall on the thumb stigma, they don't grow. There are a number of reasons. The most, if there generally there was a good pollination going on and good seed setting going on, and if it is not going on now, it may be because of the lack of pollinators. The pollinator population is also going down. I'm sure Belavadi would also speak on that. There is a dearth of pollinators today because of pollution, because of destruction of the forest ecosystems, because of lack of their niches and habitats. All over the world, there is a crisis called pollination crisis. That is because the pollinator population is now falling very much below what is required. And so people are worried about, the sterile bloom. What is sterile bloom? There are blooms, there are flowers, but they are not setting into fruits and seeds. That is the sterile bloom. The sterile bloom is becoming a big problem because of lack of pollinators, which is exactly what perhaps Pradeep Kumar Das is trying to ask. Why in some flowering plants pollination fails? It's because of lack of pollinators. Mostly, one cannot say, mostly. One has to specifically ask in each system this question and answer it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Again, we'll be getting back to you for 2 more lectures. So thank you so much, sir.
Okay, Dr. Khan. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye, sir. Good afternoon, participants. Now we have today with us the next speaker, last speaker of the session, Professor Vasuki V. Belavadi, sir. He is ICAR Emeritus Scientist, Department of Entomology, University of Agricultural Science, Gandhi Krishi Vigyan Kendra, Bengaluru. So, sir is PhD in agricultural entomology, and honors and awards to his credit are visiting FAO Fellow, University of Southampton, UK in 1995, Fellow of Royal Entomological Society, London since 1995, R.L. Narasimha Swamy Memorial Award 1998, H.S. Mehta Memorial Award 2002, Consultant for FAO Global Pollination Project 2010 to 12, Member Midterm Evaluation Team of Global Pollination Project of UNEP 2012, Indian Council for Agriculture Research Best Teacher Award 2013, Member Research Advisory Committee, Indian Council for National Agriculture Research NRC for Orchids Sikkim since 2015 to 17, Member QRT to teach AICRP on honeybees and pollinators 2019 till date. Teaching, he has teaching experience or his teaching interests are entomology courses for BSc Agriculture, MSc Agriculture, and PhD programs of University of Agricultural Science, Bengaluru. He has handled research 9 outside funded projects: DST, DPT, Indian Council for Agriculture Research, Monsanto, Coffee Board. Area of specialization or pollination ecology, taxonomy of solitary bees. Students he has guided at the various levels are MSc, he has guided MSc research project 15, PhD 14. He is a Fulbright Fellow, guided a Fulbright Fellow from Emory University, USA, on a project effects of sublethal agrochemical exposure on solitary bee reproductive fitness during 2014 and 15. Publications to his credit are research papers 118, popular articles 12, books 2, extension folders 2, extension bulletins 1, manuals 1, 2, guest lectures 78, more than 78 only because we have also invited sir earlier. So with these few words, I request sir to start sharing his screen. Over to sir.
Thank you, Dr. Khan.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Yeah, are you able to see the screen? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. In this lecture, I'll be speaking on evolution of plant-pollinator relationships. Mainly, one minute, I don't know why the slide is not moving. Yeah, evolution of plant-pollinator relationships and also on the pollination syndromes. So this is the lecture that I'll be giving in today's class. I think Dr. Ganeshi just now spoke on the fig wasp and the fig mutualism. So this will be a little different from that. I think I'll be speaking a little bit on the basics of pollination, how the plant-pollinator relationships evolved in the first place, how long it took for these relationships to evolve, and what are the different pollination syndromes that we come across usually. Everybody, all of you are botany students, and you know that pollination is transfer of pollen from anther to stigma. To just give you a brief this thing about the structure of the flower has a sepal, sepals, petals, and ovary. Ovary has ovule, style, and stigma, and the stamen has anther and filament. Now, for the pollination, the pollen grain has to come and fall on the stigma, and the pollen has to germinate and reach the ovule for fertilization. So that is the completion of the pollination process. Now this pollen can come either from the same flower, the anthers of the same flower, and then fall on the stigma, where you call it as self-pollination, or it may come from outside, where you call it as cross-pollination. So before going into the details of pollination, we should know how the plant-pollinator relationships evolved and why it is important, and what are the pollination syndromes, and what are the different types of pollination when we are talking about pollination syndromes that have evolved in nature. Now, before this, one of the basic questions that we should ask is, when flowering plants appeared on this earth? So if to answer the question of when the flowering plants appeared on this earth, we also should know how old is earth, and when life originated on this earth. And after the plants, the flowering plants appeared, when did the pollinators arrive? So these are some of the basic questions that we should try to answer to understand the relationship between the plant and pollinator, or the origin of the plant and pollinator. So we should know first the evolution of life on Earth. So I have a small animation which is based on the publication by Bill Bryson. So there I made slight modifications in the original, say, animation. So here the history of the Earth itself, which is 4,500 million years old, is reduced to just 24 hours, one day. So in 24 hours, what happened on this Earth? So at 0 hours, the Earth takes its shape, and right now it is 24 hours. So in the last 24 hours, what all happened on this Earth? So history of Earth as a 24-hour clock. So here, the basic thing is, we have equated 24 hours to 4,500 million years. 1 hour is equal to 187.5 million years. 1 minute is equal to 3.125 million years, and 1 second is equal to 52,000 years. So, so what happened is, at 0 hours, the Earth originated, and it took nearly 750 million years for the first life, or the single-celled microbe, to appear. That means the life itself is 3,750 million years old. Now, to cut short some part of the evolutionary process, and coming straight to plants, plants originated first in the sea around 8:30 p.m., that is 3,000 million years later. So after the life has originated 750 million years, after the Earth was formed, it took another 3,000 million years for the first plants to appear in the sea. That means the plants are 650 million years old. And let us see what happened in the last 4 hours on this Earth. So 650 million years ago, the first plants in the sea have appeared. And around that time, around 480 million years ago, the trilobites appeared. Trilobites are the ancestors of the present day insects. Okay, so these appeared again in the sea 480 million years ago. And the first land plants appeared 425 million years ago. And insects appeared around 400 million years ago. So this continued like this, and then the flying insects appeared about 350 million years ago. And the dinosaurs appeared 280 million years ago. So before the dinosaurs appeared, the insects were there and the plants had appeared. And in the last 1 hour, a lot of things have happened on this Earth. 135 million years ago, the flowering plants appeared. So the range is between 130 and 160 million years, but it's taken as 135 million years for the appearance of the flowering plants. And the flower visiting insects appeared almost immediately around 125 million years ago. So it may not be just the bees. There are several other insects which appeared before the bees, which visited flowers and then helped in pollination. And of course, the dinosaurs disappeared at 65 million years ago. And if the dinosaurs had not disappeared, mammals would not have radiated so much, or so much of speciation might not have occurred in mammals. That is one of the theories that goes. So once the dinosaurs disappeared, primates started appearing around 56 million years ago. And in the last few minutes, in the last 4 minutes, human beings started appearing. The first hominid species appeared about 303.65 million years ago. And the immediate ancestors of the present day Homo sapiens Homo habilis appeared 2.18 million years ago, and we, the human beings, Homo sapiens, appeared just about 3 seconds back, that is 0.16 million years ago. So this is, as I said, based on a short history of everything by Bill Bryson. I have made a few modifications for the original, say, animation. So to cut short the whole thing, the Earth originated 4,500 million years ago. Life itself originated 3,750 million years ago. Then insects originated 400 million years ago. And the first flowering plants appeared about 135 million years ago. And the first flower visiting insects about 125 million years ago. And these appeared about 100 million years ago. Increase in flowering plant species. There was a radiation in the flowering plant species with the appearance of these flower visiting insects. So between 125 and 65 million years ago, there was a very drastic increase in speciation among flowering plants, among angiosperms. The first hominid appeared 4 million years ago, Homo habilis 2.18 million years ago, and Homo sapiens 0.16 million years ago. So this is the, say, summary of the life on Earth, including the flowering plants, the flower visiting insects, bees, and radiation in angiosperms. Now, as you know, the flowering plants appeared between 130 and 160 million years ago. Dave Goulson, a very famous pollination biologist, in one of his famous books published in 2014, which is called A Sting in the Tail, he says that sex has always been difficult for plants because they cannot move. So if one cannot move, then finding a suitable partner for reproduction becomes almost impossible. So this is what Goulson says. So, but of course, there was self-pollination, but self-pollination had its own disadvantages. The major disadvantage with the self-pollination was that self-pollination leads to low or very little variability, and populations may succumb to biotic or abiotic stresses. So where is the survival of the fittest if all are equally susceptible? So that is the problem of self-pollination. So they have to invariably depend on sex facilitators. That means they need some vectors for carrying the pollen from one flower to the other flower or one plant to the other plant. So it is very, very important. So this is what Goulson said. About 135 million years ago, plants discovered wind pollination. Wind pollination has, again, its own problems. Where a plant which is, say, adopted for wind pollination, it has to produce a very large number of pollen grains because the success rate is very low. The chances of the pollen grains reaching the right flower or the stigma of the right flower is very, very low. So that is the reason why it has to produce a very large number of pollen grains, and majority of the pollen goes waste. So it is a lot of energy that is wasted. Now, around this time, between 130 and 120 million years ago, some insects discovered that pollen grains are edible and nutritious. So they accidentally fed on the pollen grains, and then they found that it is nutritious also. It is helping them to survive. So they started feeding on this. So some winged insects soon began feeding on it, mostly the beetles, and before long, some became specialists in eating them. So you see that there are a lot of fossil evidence to show this that in the Cretaceous, flower beetle has been identified with a lot of pollen on its body. So these insects, when they started flying from plant to plant in search of their food, they accidentally carried pollen grains on their bodies, trapped among hairs or in the joints between their segments. And so this is another cycad which is still there, and the cycads are still pollinated by beetles. So when by chance some pollen grains fell off the insect onto the female parts of another flower, that flower was pollinated. So it was accidental that cross-pollination started like this with the help of insects. So it was a chance factor that the pollen grains were taken on the body of these beetles, and these pollen grains fell off the insect body by chance on the right part of the flower, and that flower was pollinated. And soon plants discovered that insects can be actually used for pollination. So although much of the pollen was consumed by the insects, this was still a vast improvement over their dependence on wind, so that they can reduce the number of pollen grains that was being produced. So plants soon learned the advantage of insects visiting their flowers. So now they had to encourage these insects to visit the flowers. Plants were benefited since pollination was assured, but there was still a problem. Because as you all know, the early flowers, you know that the flowers are modifications of the foliage or leaves. So the early flowers were also greenish in color. So it was difficult, there was difficulty for these insect visitors or the flower visitors in locating the flowers. So what the plants should do in order to attract insects, they had to get better and advertise their flowers with a different color than the surrounding vegetation. And probably there was a mutation which resulted in a differently colored, other than green, petals for the flowers, and that got selected in the course of evolution. So the early lilies and magnolias were the first plants to evolve petals conspicuously white against the greenish vegetation. Even now you see many magnolias which are still whitish in color with whitish petals. So thus began a selection for flower color. Today, if you go out and then see any garden or anywhere in the wild, you'll see that every flower is differently colored or it has a different shape and size. So this kind of evolution resulted as a result of selection or the competition for pollinators. Now, the second trick that the plants, I should say, thought of was sugar-rich nectar as an extra reward, possibly to save pollen. Again, it was by accident that nectar was produced, and the nectar was taken by the flower visiting insects, and the plants soon learned that they can actually save the number of pollen by retaining this nectar or offering this nectar. So insects now started visiting flowers for taking nectar, and during that process, they also pollinated. They also carried pollen and then dropped the pollen in the right place. With this new reliable means of pollination, insect pollinated plants became enormously successful and diversified. Now, specialization in insects like moths, butterflies, and some flies evolved long tubular mouthparts to suck up nectar. So they had wonderful mouthparts. So this is some kind of a specialization that the insects developed to take nectar that was hidden by these plants. So there was a specialization on the part of the plants. There was a specialization on the part of the insects. So the plants did not want an insect which is actually not pollinating to take nectar or rob nectar. So it wanted to hide its nectar to be taken by only those insects which are capable of pollinating. So this is another kind of say specialization that started. And the most specialized and successful group to emerge were the bees. This was around, as I said, around 100 million years ago. The masters of gathering nectar and pollen to this day. So today, we have so many species of bees. It is because they are so specialized and they are the most successful in taking nectar and then pollinating the crops. And in fact, with the arrival of the bees, there was a heavy competition among plants to attract these bees, and that resulted in so many species. The first true bees appeared between 132 or 113 million years ago. Now, this is a fossil bee collected in Myanmar, an amber fossil collected, which is dated as about 100. Yes, what is the problem? Okay. It is about 100 million years old, collected in Myanmar in 2001. And based on this, Poyner in 2020, that is just last year, he published a paper in Paleodiversity. This is a bee, and this bee, in fact, belongs to a new family, Discoscapidae, new family, and new genus and species. And there are plenty of pollen grains on this, which are again dated back to more than 100 million years old. So there is a lot of evidence to show that the evolution of bees was more than 100 million years ago. So, and the competition for pollinators resulted in selection for brighter colors, patterns, elaborate shapes and variations in quantity and quality of rewards offered by the flowers. So the competition led to all these kinds of variations among the plants. So this resulted in selection for various colors, patterns, and all this, and this led to a sudden increase in speciation among plants. And this is what is termed as pollinator-mediated speciation in angiosperms. So if you have so many species of plants today in the world, it is mostly because of the competition that was given by the pollinators for the plants, or the plant populations. So how many flowering plants are there in the world? There are an estimated 295,383 species of flowering plants in the world, based on a paper by Kristen, House, and Bing in 2016. And this is supposed to be the most authentic number. And of this, 87.5% of the species entirely or partially depend on flower visitors for successful seed set. So 87.5% of the angiosperms, or the flowering plant species, entirely or partially depend on flower visitors for successful seed set. So this is another important thing that you should keep in mind. And in India, we have, according to Envy Center for Floral Diversity, published in 2018, 21,411 species of flowering plants, which amounts to about 7% of the world flora. And of these 16,000 species, at least 16,000 species require pollinating agents. Okay, so they do set because of the visitation by the pollinating insects. Now, there is also a very interesting paper by Klein, published in 2007, in which they found that of the 115 global food crops that we use around the world for food, 87 depend directly or indirectly on insects for pollination. And it amounts to about 35% of the global food production. So 35% of the global food production is because of pollinators, mainly the bees. And the annual economic value of pollination service worldwide is about $577 billion. So the economic value of pollination service is so high, but still we take pollination for granted. It's because if we go out to a field and then see a field or an orchard of mango or some other apple or somewhere which is in full bloom, we exclaim that there is a heavy flowering, and this time we are going to get a heavy say set or a bumper crop. But we will not worry how all these flowers are going to set fruits. Okay, so we take pollination for granted. So anyway, whether it's a farmer or a learned man, it is common that we take pollination for granted. In fact, a very famous economist with the United Nations, Dr. Pawan Sukhdev, he has made a statement that not a single bee has ever sent you an invoice. And that is part of the problem, because most of what comes to us from nature is free. We take it as free because it is not invoiced, because it is not priced, because it is not traded in markets. We tend to ignore it. So this is this thing which was written in 2010 by Pawan Sukhdev in his report for the economics and ecosystems and diversity, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. It was a UN report given by Pawan Sukhdev, in which he identifies that pollinators are important, and then we have to value the pollination. So we consider pollination as a free ecosystem service, which is wrong. Now, in a nutshell, till now, whatever I have said, I told that the flowering plants and pollinators have co-evolved. So there has been a lot of changes that have occurred among the flowering plants. There is a lot of speciation. And again, similarly, among pollinators, which have started visiting these flowers, they have started adapting to the flowering plants, and then there is a lot of speciation among the pollinators, whether it is a butterfly or a bee or a bird or any other insect or animal. They have co-evolved with the flowering plants for their own needs. Natural selection has led to various colors, shapes, and sizes of flowers, including seasonality, quality, and quantity of rewards. So the plants, when you see, as I said, if you go out and then see, each species of plant will have a different colored flower, different sizes of flowers, and the flowers are produced in different seasons or in different times of the day. The quality and the quantity of reward or the nectar that is given is different from flower to flower. And all these kinds of adaptations are because of natural selection. Okay, the natural selection has led to all these, and then each one has led to a different species. Okay, so you see so much of variation among plants because of this. And this has led to specialization on both sides, as I said. And the specialization leads to pollination syndromes. Now, I think I'll stop a little while if there are any questions. If you have any questions, you can ask, please. Are there any questions?
Sir,
Yeah.
There are pollen allergies
Yeah.
in humans.
Okay.
Are there any kind of problems even in insects when the insects try to, because almost the physiological responses of almost all the animals will be a little bit less or more same. So when these insects carry the pollens on their bodies, whether they will have any kind of any negative impact on them?
I'm not sure I know about this, but it's a good question. I think one has to look into this. And because you see, the insects, though they carry it on their body, it will be sticking to the hairs on the body, and they have what is called as an exoskeleton. So they do not directly come in contact with the pollen or whatever chemical that is there. So unless it gets into the intersegmental membranes and then goes inside. So that is one of the reasons probably the insects may not be that affected, but it is worth looking into. Yeah.
So, and one more thing is whether it will be very easy to digest the cellulosic matter by the insects.
They have
familiar about the insect physiology.
Yeah, they have a lot of symbionts, endosymbionts, many of these insects. Actually, there are several species of bacteria which are involved, which help them in the digestion of cellulose. Okay, so that is one of the reasons why, and that is one very interesting thing that is developing in both microbiology and also in entomology, where they are looking at the endosymbionts which are specific to certain groups of insects. Okay, so which are specialized in, say, helping in the digestion of some of these things which the insects consume. Yeah.
Very interesting, and thank you, sir, very much. I said there is a question from a participant.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Do we have any fossilized insects in India?
We do have many fossilized insects. So I should have brought some. I have with me in my collections. I should have shown you. Maybe in one of the next classes I will show you the fossilized insects. We have insects. We have fossilized insects collected in Gujarat. Okay, there is a site in Gujarat where it is known for fossils. There are plenty of insect fossils collected there. And Burma is one place where a lot of insect fossils are available, and many papers have come from the Burmese amber collection, amber fossils. Okay, yeah. Maybe I can speak on how the fossilization occurs and all this. That also I can tell you. Yeah, in one of the next.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Sir, you continue, sir. Yes.
Okay then. Yeah. Okay then we will move on to pollination syndromes. Okay, pollination syndrome is something which has, say, adaptation under natural conditions by two or more organisms. Okay, so pollination syndrome is an adaptation from the point of view of the plant and also from the point of view of the pollinator. So both of them have co-adapted for pollination purpose. So the plant is benefited and the insect also is benefited. So it is mostly for reducing competition for pollinators and for successful seed set in the plants. So the floral traits that have evolved in response to natural selection imposed by pollen vectors, both abiotic or biotic. Pollen vectors may be abiotic or biotic. So the traits have evolved. For example, if it is a wind pollinated plant, so the trait that has evolved is with the size of the pollen grain, the way the pollen grains are released, and the number of pollen grains that are produced. So that is adopted for wind pollination, and that is selected under natural selection process. Okay, and if it is a biotic pollination, if it is dependent on a particular group of animal or insect, so the way the pollen is offered, the way the nectar is offered, how a particular group of insect is capable of taking nectar and then transferring the pollen. So that is a syndrome between that group of animal and the plant. So the flower shape, size, color, odor, the pollen type, that is pollen, whether it is powdery, whether it is sticky, and the total number of pollen grains that are produced, and the nectar, the traits of the nectar, the quality of the nectar, how concentrated the sugar is, or the quantity of nectar, whether it is very little or enormous quantity of nectar is produced, what is the composition of the nectar, and the timing of flowering in the day, whether it opens in the daytime or in the evening times or in the night times. So all these things contribute towards the pollination syndrome. So all these characters or the floral traits get selected depending on the type of the pollinator that is involved. So if you look at the pollination syndrome, the entire pollination syndromes can be classified into two types. One is self-pollination and the other is cross-pollination. Under self-pollination, you have autogamy, where the pollen from the same flower, the pollen from the anther of the flower is falling on the stigma of the same flower without the aid of any agency. Okay, so naturally it falls on its own on the stigma of the same flower, and that is autogamous self-pollination. Now, geitonogamy is another type of self-pollination where the pollen from a flower is falling on the stigma of a flower on the same plant, a different flower on the same plant. Okay, so within the plant, the pollination is occurring, but the pollen is coming from another plant. So this can happen in many cross-pollinated plants also. And cross-pollination can be of abiotic or biotic nature. Abiotic is either hydrophily, where the water is involved in pollination, or water is involved as a vector for pollen, carrying the pollen. And anemophily is where wind is used as the vector. So the pollen is carried by the wind. Now, biotic pollination, you have so many kinds of biotic pollination. One is melitophily, where the bees are involved in pollination. So bees carry the pollen. Then psychophily, where the butterflies are involved in carrying the pollen. Then phalaenophily, where moths are involved in pollination. Then cantherophily, where beetles are involved in pollination. Then myophily, where flies are involved in pollination. Ornithophily, where birds are involved in pollination. Then chiropterophily, where bats are involved in pollination. And thyrophily, where the non-flying mammals are involved in pollination. So you have so many kinds of, so each one is a syndrome. So autogamous pollination, the adaptation in the plant is that the pollen is, the anthers are very close to the stigma and the pollen automatically falls on the stigma. So that is a syndrome. Then geitonogamy, the pollen from another plant, another flower of the same plant is falling on the stigma with, probably it may be either by gravity or an insect may be visiting two flowers in the same plant. Okay, and it may be transferring the pollen, but it is still self-pollination. And in hydrophily, the water is used. So it is in aquatic plants. Very few plants are in fact use this. If you look at the total number of plants in the plant kingdom, very few plants use hydrophily for pollination. Then anemophily, you know that the pollen should be powdery, it should be very light, it should be carried by the wind, and the number of pollen grains should be very high so that it is carried easily to another flower. Then melitophily is using the bees. So bees visit, so it should be attractive to bees. So all these biotic pollinations, they are actually for example, the flowers which are pollinated or the plants which are pollinated by butterflies may not be visited by bees. Okay, the color may be different. The way the nectar is hidden may be different, which the bees cannot visit. And similarly, the melitophily, when the bees are visiting, the butterflies may not be visiting those flowers. So they have different kinds of adaptations for attracting a particular group of animal, particular group of insects for pollination. So this is the syndrome. We'll go into details of each of these. And I call this as modes of pollination. So in self-pollination, pollen from the same flower falling on the stigma of the same flower, or same or another flower of the same plant. So that is self-pollination. Now, supposing if there are two flowers on the same plant, autogamy is the pollen is falling from the same anther to the stigma of the same flower. And in geitonogamy, the pollen from one flower is going to the stigma of another flower. And this may be moved by a bee, this may be moved by wind, or anything. So this is the example that I have showing is only for the sake of example, but in this plant it is not true. But the examples, the best examples are for self-pollination on most of the cereals. So most of the cereals that are cultivated are self-pollinated. Now coming to cross-pollination, the pollen from one flower, pollen from a flower of one plant is transferred to the stigma of the flower of another plant. Okay, so that is cross-pollination. So when we are talking about pollination syndrome, the evolution of floral traits through natural selection in response to pollinators or agents of pollination. So the floral traits have evolved in response to the type of pollinator that is frequently visiting that group of plants or that type of plants. So this over time, over say thousands of years or millions of years, have led to a particular type of flower, development of a particular type of flower, which is visited by only a particular type of insect or particular type of animal. So that has led to the syndrome. So that you should understand. Then coming to abiotic and biotic pollination. In abiotic pollination, you have the pollination through non-living agents. So you have anemophily, where wind is the agent of pollen transfer. So you call it as, whoever is actually carrying something is called a vector. So vector need not mean that it is only a mosquito which is carrying some disease or something like that. So a pollen vector, you can say the wind is the agent of pollen transfer. So small conspicuous flowers in all these anemophilous plants will have small inconspicuous flowers, and they are not usually colored. Okay, they will be very simple, bland colored, whitish or yellowish, and the pollen grains are very light, powdery, and they are not sticky. Okay, so that is the characteristic feature of an anemophilous plant. So the pollen grains are light, they are powdery, they are loose, and they are not sticky. And they're produced in extremely large quantities. As I said earlier, the plant has to produce, the flower has to produce a lot of pollen, because the chances of the pollen grain reaching the right stigma is very, very less. Okay, it depends on the wind speed, it depends on the wind direction, it depends on the availability of another plant in nature of the same species or the same group, and the flower must be in the right stage to receive this pollen. So all of these chance factors are there. So the total number of pollen that is produced in each flower is very, very large. And there is no scent or nectar in these flowers because they do not attract anything. They are simply depending on the wind movement. So there is no scent or nectar. And the stigma may be large or feathery to catch pollen. And some insects may visit for collecting pollen. You may see that some bees visiting the paddy field on the paddy earheads or rice earheads, or even on jowar earheads. Sometimes you will see some bees visiting for collecting pollen. And they also may help in transferring the pollen to the stigma of the flowers of the same earhead or some another earhead. And that process is called ambophily, where both insects and wind are involved in pollination. And then there are very few examples for that. Then the next one is hydrophily. Hydrophily is using water current as the vector. Flowers here again are small and inconspicuous. Pollen grains are many and large, and stigma again is feathery to catch the pollen. And these are hydrophilous plants are relatively less common. Less than 2% of the total plant species are they depend on hydrophily. So there are two types of pollination. One is surface pollination. In surface pollination, the pollen grains float on the water surface and reach the flower of another plant, as you see in case of hydrilla. And in submerged pollination, the second type is submerged pollination, where the pollen grains are heavy, they sink in water and may get into the submerged open flowers. The flowers may be, other flowers may be at the bottom and they sink, and then when they are sinking, they may just be caught by these open flowers. So the example is Najas indica. So this is one example for hydrophily. So there are two types in hydrophily. One is surface pollination and the other is submerged pollination. In surface pollination, the pollen grains float on the water. In submerged pollination, the pollen grains sink and then reach the other flowers. Then coming to the biotic pollination is referred to as zoophily, transfer of pollen with the assistance of an animal. Okay, an animal is involved. It may be an insect, it may be a bird, it may be a bat, it may be monkeys. So there are many. There are some which are pollinated by rats. There are some which are pollinated by lizards. So all these are zoophilous. They are adopted for pollination by these groups of animals. So the basic requirement for biotic pollination is that the flower should be attractive. So the attraction is one important thing, the color of the flower. So it is a display for a long distance recognition and for landing. So that an insect or a bird should be able to see the flower from a distance, and it should orient towards that flower and then land on the flower or near the flower. So that is one attraction. Then another thing is scent, to detect the presence. When it has come closer to the flower, it should be certain that it is landing on the right flower for getting the right food. Because a pollinator is not interested in pollination, it is interested in the reward that it is getting, right? So the pollinator should know whether it is going to get its reward. The reward may be pollen, the reward may be nectar. So the scent, when it comes very closer, the scent of the, say, whatever the reward that is there, it should be, the pollinator should be able to perceive. So that will help it to land on the flower or closer to the flower. So that is one of the basic requirements. So as I said, the rewards, the pollen as the protein source for the pollinator, or the nectar, the sugar for energy. So the nectar, again, the quality and the quantity, it varies depending on the type of pollinator that is involved, the type of flower that is being pollinated. But there are a few plants which also dupe the pollinators. They get pollinated by deceit. Maybe in one of the next lectures, I'll be talking about the deceit, pollination by deceit. So some plants attract, they will be attractive to the pollinator, but they do not offer any reward. They do not waste any energy in giving a reward, but are very attractive to specific pollinators, and the pollinators repeatedly make the same mistake of visiting the same flowers. Okay, though they will not be getting any reward. We'll come to that maybe in one of the next lectures. The animals that are involved in biotic pollination are, they may be wingless mammals. Wingless mammals are rodents, squirrels, lizards. So all these are winged, and even there are some plants which are pollinated by monkeys, by lemurs. They pollinate. In fact, there is a very famous tree in Indonesia which is pollinated by these lemurs. And then, of course, winged mammals are bats, and there are birds. There are many species of plants which are pollinated by birds, and there are several other groups of insects. As I said, there may be bees, butterflies, flies, moths, and also beetles. So all these are very important pollinators. Now we'll go one by one. Pollination by wingless mammals, which we call as thyrophily. Thyrophily is pollination by wingless mammals. So what are the characters of thyrophilous flowers? A flower that is modified for or adapted for pollination by wingless mammals. So the wingless mammal means the flowers should be large, so the robust flowers, and the flowers are dull colored. They are not very brightly colored, and they are cup shaped so that the mammal or a small mammal which should go and then sit on that. And then usually the ground level or geoflorus, they are produced at the ground level. And then, so I should say, instead of saying pollination by wingless mammals, you can say it is wingless animals, let us say, okay, because I'll be talking about rodents also in this. So the stigma on the nectar distance is about 10 millimeters, very close to the stigma, the nectar is located, so that they do not make a mistake of not touching the stigma. After they visit another flower with the pollen grains, they would have come on their noses or on their heads, and then when they are trying to take the nectar, they come in contact with the stigma and then transfer the pollen. And they also have yeast-like odor, or that is a long distance cue for them. So from a distance, they can actually identify, because most of these are nocturnal blooming. They open in the night, and only those animals which are active in the night are capable of playing the role of pollinators. Like, for example, this is one of the species where it is pollinated by a rodent. So again, rodents are excellent pollinators of many of these crops, like Protea cordata, Colchicum coloratum, and Masonia depressa. So these are some of the. So you see that the size of the flower also is very large, and it is at the ground level. And you see that there are a lot of pollen. The stigma, the stamens are there, and then the stigma is very close. So the rodent, when it is visiting, it gets the pollen, and then it also deposits the pollen on the stigma. Then the next one is chiropterophily. Chiropterophily is winged mammals, or the bats, the pollination by bats. And there are two kinds of flowers. The flowers which are pollinated by bats, you can classify them into two kinds of flowers. One is large and showy, whitish or light in color with musty odor, and they open in the night time. They are whitish and they open in the night time. And because you know that the bats are nocturnal, and often with large, heavy balls of pollen, large number of large pollen grains, and the size of the pollen grains are in clusters and in very large numbers. And usually you find these in Asia, Africa, and parts of Europe. And these are pollinated by large bats in the family Pteropodidae. So the large bats, which are huge bats, and they go and then these flowers are also so large, they can go and then sit on the flower and then take the nectar. So they go for taking nectar, and in the meantime, they also pollinate. And the second kind of flower is long tubular, often bell-shaped flowers. These are not very, very large, but they are long and tubular, and they are bell-shaped, and the nectar is available for longer periods, and they have a kind of a sulfur scent. And this you find in the New World, mainly in the American continent. And this is actually pollinated by tiny bats of the subfamily Glossophagenae. And these bats do not land on the flower, they hover near the flower. They will be still flying, hovering near the flower, and then they have some kind of a pointed mouth part with the help of which they can insert their mouth into the tube of the bell-shaped flower and then take nectar. So this is how these Chiropterophilus flowers look like. So there's a Mexican long-tongued bat which is hovering and then taking nectar, and also it brings about pollination. And you'll know that wild bananas are pollinated by bats. Even in India, you find a lot of wild banana in nature, and they are pollinated by the flying fox, or the Indian flying fox. So this is how it actually goes and then sits on the flower and to take the nectar and then brings about pollination. Then ornithophily is pollination by birds. So the main characters of the bird-pollinated flowers are that they are usually tubular with recurved petals. Then they have a strong support for perching, because many of these birds, they sit on the flower. Okay, they have the place for sitting, and they are brightly colored, red, orange, or yellowish in color. and they are odorless because birds have poor sense of smell. And the another important character is all ornithophilous flowers are open during the day. They are diurnal. Now, they produce more nectar, and the nectar is more dilute, except in the case of hummingbird pollinated flowers. Hummingbirds do not occur in India. They are there in the in the West, and you have many species of hummingbirds which are excellent pollinators of many plants there. And in most of the bird pollinated plants that we have here, the nectar is very dilute. And pollen production is modest. It is dusted on the bird's head or back, and many birds have long beaks for drawing nectar. So this is the kind of adaptation that the plants have and the birds have for pollination. Now, this is a hummingbird, which again does not land on the flower. It keeps hovering, and then it takes nectar, and in the meantime, it also pollinates. And there are many species of plants which you come across, many tree species you come across, which are pollinated by birds, even in India. Then coming to pollination by beetles, coming to insects, okay, pollination by beetles, which is called as cantherophily. Okay, as I said in the beginning, beetles were the first pollinators of the most ancient plants on earth. Okay, they were the first to experiment feeding on pollen and transferring pollen, and that is how the whole story started. Okay, so cantherophily is beetle pollination. So beetle pollinated flowers are large, many are light colored or greenish in color. Okay, and they are heavily scented. They have a fruity odor or decaying organic matter. Maybe the smell may also be there in some, and they are flat or dish shaped. The pollen is easily accessible because beetles do not go in search of the pollen. If the pollen is available, they simply take that so that it should be easily accessible. And some flowers trap beetles inside to keep them for longer periods. So the beetles enter into the flower and then they stay inside for some time, and then they are released with the pollen. They come out and then visit another flower. So that kind of a thing also is there, that kind of adaptation. And many species of plants are thermogenic. That means inside the flower, the temperature increases. So in temperate areas, this will attract beetles to keep them warm. So they go inside and then stay inside the flower, so that it is warm inside. So that itself, there is no other reward for them. So that itself helps in pollination. Now, Nitidulidae is one very important group of beetles. It's a family of beetles which are excellent pollinators of many species of plants. Even now, you have some commercially cultivated crops which are pollinated by these beetles. And these beetles were abundant during Mesozoic, about 200 million years ago, and they visited flowers of the earliest angiosperms. Okay, so these nitidulids are known for that. And many present-day beetle pollination associations, like that of magnolia, a primitive woody angiosperm, have ancient evolutionary origins because of these beetles. These beetles are still involved in the pollination of magnolias. So this is another beetle, which is another weevil, which is very important. It's the oil palm weevil, which is a pollinator of oil palm. Then, of course, who has not eaten custard apple? Custard apple, in fact, is pollinated by a beetle, again a nitidulid. And if the nitidulid beetles are not there, the farmer is not going to get even a single custard apple fruit. Okay. Now, supposing if the nitidulid activity is not there, it is not found in the field, the farmer has to resort to hand pollination. Okay. So this is, in fact, is a very interesting thing that in one of the ICR institutes, in a variety of custard apple was developed by the breeders with more number of more flesh inside that. Okay, and the seeds were small, and this was actually bred through crossing some varieties, and then when they released that variety and the farmers took that variety for cultivation, the farmers experienced that after 2 or 3 years they came back and then started telling that there is no setting. And then the people realized that the flowers are so compact in this new variety that the nitidulid beetles cannot get in. So they had actually ignored the pollinator, and they had developed a high yielding, better quality variety, which in fact the farmers have to now resort to hand pollination to get any yield. So this is a kind of a thing that happens in science also. Okay. Then the next one is pollination by flies, that is myophily. The pollination by flies is referred to as myophily. So the flowers are pale or dull white, some are dark brown or purple, also with translucent markings. So there will be some kind of markings on the flower. And often the flowers which are pollinated by flies, which are attracting flies, they have nasty odor or rotting meat odor. And there is no nectar guide. I will tell you what is nectar guide in one of the next slides. So there are no nectar guides on the petals or on the flowers. And the flowers are funnel-like, and again, many of these myophilous flowers or plants, they actually trap the flies. They actually attract the flies and then retain the flies inside, okay, for several hours and sometimes days. For example, mosquito is also a pollinator. You must be wondering why I have put mosquitoes photo here. Male mosquitoes, you know that they visit flowers and they are pollinators, especially some orchids are pollinated by mosquitoes. Then taconid flies are excellent pollinators. Then sylphids are referred to as flower flies or hover flies. They are excellent pollinators of many crops, many plants. Then bombylids are referred to as bee flies. They are also experts in taking nectar and visiting flowers. And of course, this is the arum flower that actually traps flies inside. I'll tell you how they actually trap flies. So the flower has a structure like this. So it actually produces a scent, which actually makes the makes the fly to get inside. So inside, the flower has downward directed hairs, stiff hairs are there. So if it tries to come out, it cannot come out because of these hairs. It is trapped inside. Okay. Now, when it goes inside, the stigma is ready to receive pollen, but the stamens, the anthers are not ready. The pollen dehiscence has not occurred. Okay. The anthers are not ready, but the stigma is ready to receive pollen. So the flies would have visited some other flowers, and then it would have come here with the pollen, and then they actually deposit the pollen in their in their attempts to escape from the flower. They will be continuously trying to escape from this. But it takes nearly 2 days for these hairs to soften. Okay, so the hairs wither after 2 days and the flies escape. And by the time they are ready to escape, the anthers would have dehisced pollen. The pollen dehiscence would have occurred and the pollen grains will be outside, and the flies also would take this pollen and then they go out. This is a beautiful way in which the plant has adopted for pollination. It's not giving any nectar or anything. It is simply attracting with a smell, and then the fly comes inside, gets trapped, and deposits the pollen on the stigma, whatever the pollen that it has brought, and then while going, it takes the pollen from this flower and then goes to another flower. Okay, this is a wonderful adaptation that you see among plants and also the insects. Then the pollination by moths is phalinophily. So the flowers are in clusters. In moth-pollinated plants, the flowers are in clusters. There is a landing platform for the moth. The moth has to sit on the flower, and the flowers are usually dull or white in color because moths are nocturnal, and these flowers also open in the evening or in the night. They are also nocturnal, open in the evenings or late in night. And there is ample nectar production, but hidden deep inside in the corolla tube. So the corolla tube is long, and at the base of the corolla tube, the nectar is hidden, and the moths have very long mouth parts. Okay, they have a very long proboscis, which they actually insert into the corolla tube and then take nectar. So during this process, they actually bring about pollination also. Examples are morning glory, tobacco, yucca, etc. So yucca is a very famous plant, yucca flower with yucca moths. They go inside and then they breed inside the yucca flowers. So just like the fig wasps, and then they come out with the pollen. Then this is a Manduca sexta, which is a spinged moth, which actually hovers over the flower and then introduces its proboscis inside to take the nectar. And it also carries the pollen on its proboscis. Now, one of the best examples is that of the Darwin's orchid, Angraecum sesquipedale. So this is an orchid from Madagascar. In fact, somebody, when he found this orchid, he sent the sample of this orchid to Darwin, I think sometime in 1860s or so. And then after seeing the orchid, after seeing the specimen of the flower, it seems Darwin exclaimed that the corolla tube, the spur of the orchid, which is the nectar tube, is so long. It is about 30 centimeters long, which is about 1 foot long. Okay. And this must be, and it seems Darwin exclaimed that this must be pollinated by a spinged moth. No other insect can pollinate this orchid. That's what he said. And nearly 20 years after Darwin's death, the moth was discovered, which is called Xanthopon morgoni predicta. It is called predicta. Subspecies is named as predicta because Darwin had predicted this. So this has a tongue length or the proboscis length of nearly 30 centimeters. And only this can take the nectar from this spur that is there in this orchid. So this is some kind of an extreme adaptation, you can say, extremes of adaptation in plants. Then butterfly pollination is psychophily. The butterfly pollinated flowers are usually showy. They are very bright, red, pinkish, yellow, or lavender in color. The flowers again are in clusters in this because the butterfly sits in one place and then it should be able to take nectar from several flowers. You must have seen lantana flowers. So lantana flowers are pollinated by butterflies. Butterflies sit on that and then it can take nectar from different flowers from the cluster of flowers that is there on the lantana plant. Then they open during the day because butterflies are diurnal. There must be a landing area for the plant, for the butterfly. They have to sit, okay? And usually tubular nectar tubes, again to suit the long proboscis. When butterflies have long proboscis, so to suit that, they have tubular nectar tubes. And there are simple nectar guides are present. So nectar guides are present. Nectar guides are markings on the flowers which are there. I'll show you maybe in one of the next slides it will come. So these are some of the butterfly pollinated flowers. You see that the flowers have tubular corolla into which it can insert its proboscis and then take nectar. Then we move on to melitophily or pollination by bees. So of all the pollinators, bees are the most efficient. I should say bees are the most efficient because there is one clear advantage for bees over other modes of pollination or other pollinators because bees keep faithful to the same type of flowers. They keep visiting the same type of flowers repeatedly. Okay, they track down the flowers of the same species and then they keep visiting, or what you can call it as fidelity in foraging. Okay, so if there is a plot of a particular species of plant, if bees are visiting, they continuously visit the same place because most of these bees have nests. Okay, whether it is a solitary bee or a social bee, they have nests, and then they are not collecting nectar or pollen for their own survival, not only for their own survival, but they are also carrying it to feed their young ones. Okay, so to feed their young ones, which are there in their nest, they have to take back and then come back here. So this is one thing for which they became, some kind of honesty they show to the same species of plant because it is easier for them to go and then come back to the same plant or the same group of plants. So this is the basis for the theory about rise in angiosperms with the arrival of bees because, and as I said, it is a pollinator mediated evolution. So they keep visiting, so the fidelity of foraging, so the plants get selected. When they compete for bees for pollination, they get selected. The traits of the plants that have evolved, they get selected if it is adjustable to a particular group of bees. So that's the reason why they say that there is a rise in the angiosperms with the arrival of bees. Now, characters of bee pollinated flowers are, they're usually bright white or yellow, blue, or even ultraviolet, because bees are capable of seeing in the ultraviolet. So nectar guides are usually present. These are the nectar guides. So a bee, when it lands on the flower, it knows where the nectar is. So these kind of markings will be there on the flowers, and the bee knows that the nectar is here. Okay, it is a kind of a guide that the plant gives, that you need not have to waste your time searching for the nectar. Nectar is here. You can put your proboscis here, and in the meanwhile, the other parts of the flower also come in contact. Then the nectar is usually present, and with mild or pleasant odor. The flowers have mild or pleasant odor, and the pollen grains are sticky. So all bee pollinated flowers, and I think even for the ones which are adopted for butterflies or moth pollination, the pollen grains are sticky. They stick to the body of the bee. Okay, so that without their knowledge, they will be carrying the pollen. Now, and there is a landing platform for the bees. So the bee, when a flower is adopted for pollination by bees, they also provide a landing platform for the bee. So the bee lands here and then introduces its proboscis inside. And during this process, it comes in contact with the stigma and the anthers. And usually the flowers are tubular, but there are several species where the nectar may be available right above the flowers. So more about bees in my next lecture. In my next lecture, I'll talk more about bees. I think I'll stop here. And if there are any questions, I'm ready to answer. Sir, are there any questions?
Sir, it was too interesting concept to listen. Actually,
Okay.
really, from where you get such a wonderful information. Really, we wondered that no textbook and no kind of material, instruction material, is giving such a lucid and vivid picturization of the subject. So
Thank you.
subject could be like this also. It is really, after listening to all the GKVK experts, it looks that they are all encyclopedia in their own
No.
areas. So
Whatever the information that we have, we share. That's all.
really, but how could you, I mean, say, we never come across in Google search engine or somewhere.
It is available.
We try to see also, no, we'll get some or other kind of information, but not such informative. I mean, to say, how, I mean, to say, it looks when people say that entomology or people say that pollination, what is great in that, they will say, listen to you, know, really. There is a, we have to learn. So that is why we always have you that sir, please give lectures. This
So the next lecture will be on bees mostly. Yeah.
No, our complementary generation of teachers. We are also in the team of teachers itself. Though I am a coordinator, but still, sir, you are very on the very mountain peak where we can see from far only. But subject really, sir, it is I can all goosebumps I'm getting when I'm talking. Sir, really,
Mattering too much.
kind of,
I think let the participants ask some questions, please.
Yeah, participants are also very, I mean to say, amazed. Already everybody is saying informative session. Thank you, sir. Like everybody is very, I mean to say, very much, they are.
Yeah.
Sir, everybody is very, I mean to say, everybody is like same, because we are all contemporary teachers. So we can't, I mean to say, even guess how the information should be told and how the things are executed and all. Really, it's a hats off to listen all these things. So, is there any, I would say, they said that insect pollinated flowers are colored, and what about the other birds or other animals? Just now you have shown some animals are also there. So, whether
the flowers that are pollinated by birds are usually reddish in color. Bees do not see red. So usually dark red flowers are not pollinated by bees. You may see butterflies visiting the red flowers. Okay, so the bees actually, they go in for whitish, yellowish, bluish. So this kind of flowers with ultraviolet markings and all that. So this kind of variation is there among the plants also. Yeah.
So visionary clues are working very important in identification or recognition, whatever recognition is there.
Yeah. Actually, color and odor, both these are very important.
So their olfactory organs are also very sensitive actually.
Really.
How about the bats and all? Because usually
Bats also they actually have olfactory cues. They get the olfactory cues, and the bat pollinated flowers are usually whitish in color because they are nocturnal. So maybe once they, you know that the bats actually cannot actually pursue by some kind of what do you say? It is reflection of the sound sonar, this thing that they use. Okay, when they are navigating, and they also use a lot of olfactory cues to come closer to the flowers, come closer to the plants. Yeah.
Sir, I could have requested you on email, but if you have written some kind of reviews or some kind of such chapters, if they are out of your any permission and all, can you please share so that I can share that material? Because usually
I don't think I have written on pollination in general like that, but on bees I have written a couple of
so any material we can
my publications
in our lecture refresher courses we'll circulate some kind of literature
for my lectures, like my research papers, which many of my students have worked on pollination, so we have published some of them, and some of them I'll be using in the future lectures. I don't know if I will on bees. Okay, next in the next.
Will be happy from here onwards. I will be requesting same people to the all resource persons. I have got now idea.
One minute.
Your written things may be more beautiful than the visionary things. So there is one question from the participant. I'll read it out.
Yeah.
In case of hydrophytic flowering plants, except water, is there any other agent also for pollination?
I think I should say I don't know really. Water as a carrier is one thing, and if something else is also involved, like some water insects, I don't think I've never come across any aquatic insects involved in pollination. I should check that. Yeah, in fact, it had never occurred to me, I should say.
So my humble request is to share some kind of your any review or something so that we can share among the participants also.
No, I was just going to ask you one thing. Next class I'll be speaking on bees. Will it be too boring?
No. You cannot never be boring actually. Honeybees and non-apis species also you told.
Yeah, non-apis species, mainly non-apis species.
Yeah, non-apis, and you have the separate non-apis and non-apis also.
Yeah, importance of bees as pollinators that I'll be speaking. Maybe I'll let you know about my future lecture.
Yeah, actually Ganesha sir was the one who told me about you. So that is how I could get your information.
I should tell you, Ganesha, myself and Uma Shankar, we were classmates since our BSc days.
Yes. All three have the same, I want to say, almost how you make the people.
They are both of them are much above me.
No. Everybody has their own area. Bioprospecting and all, DNA barcoding and all, and ecosystem and ecology and all. And you are the pollination and almost about the entomology, everything. Really, sir, it is a wonder. Like these are gems of our GKVK, because GKVK is such a good place that so many good teachers and very efficient people. Very nice people. I can't describe because 3 more lectures are there with us again back. So thank you so much for sharing your. All the.
And you can share my email with the participants.
Sure.
If they have any questions, they can write
in the end of the refresher course, I will be sending the speakers. Details to one and all.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So one more thing that has come.
Yeah.
Is it in again same? I think continuation. They have told that they have giving answer. It seems most aquatic plants have insects pollination. Only less than 3% pollen floats on the water. So one participant is asking, I think you may have seen the chat. So the participant has shared that most aquatic plants have insect pollination,
Mhm.
and only less than 3% pollens float on water, she says.
Oh, possible. I don't know. I have no idea about that. I've just given from whatever the literature that I had. It must be really interesting to work on aquatic pollination and the role of insects. Yeah, that's true.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you
Okay.
so much for all.
Right, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. So, dear participants, tomorrow also we have the, let me just say, lectures. Tomorrow is a day 4, and day 4 we have tomorrow is a very interesting day actually, because I think most of the teachers who are non-plant science, or even in plant science also, this is more important debate always going on. So tomorrow we are going to have the sequence analysis and gene cloning. In this 2 sessions, one is a lecture, other one is a hands-on. So please be ready. Tomorrow we are having a sequence analysis and gene cloning. It will be very important lecture for us. And also we have a lecture by Professor Muralidhar sir. He'll be talking about communications in biology. That will be very interesting. And Uma Shankar sir may be continuing about bioprospecting. So tomorrow we have 4 lectures. 2 lectures are on sequence analysis and gene cloning. So please, participants, be part of our refresher course. You have taken so much, I mean to say, interest in joining, filling the application. Quite, I was able to see, amazed that afternoon session we are having less number of participants. So please, I request again and again, give time for such a precious occasion of science. We are, I think, celebrating science. I got a mail from Academies stating yesterday that I'll be sharing that email to you on this. You see the email sent. So this is a mail sent from coordinator of our this refresher course. I mean, it's a coordinator in the sense coordinator of science education program, Dr. C.S. Ravi Kumar sir. He has told that science academies have been supporting the lecture workshops and refresher courses on current topics on current interest throughout the country. And these programs are conducted by joint science education panel of academies, supported by Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. And now DST is celebrating the 75th year of Indian independence, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. So the Mahotsav is a series of science and technology programs and events to be organized to commemorate the 75th anniversary of India's independence. And the curtain raiser activities begin from 12th of March, and these programs will run for 75 weeks prior to 15th August 2022. So series of programs are there. One such program could be our program. So please make a note about this mail, what has been communicated to us. Thank you, participants. All participants are there here, but I request that please post some questions to whatever in your level, whatever question you can post. You can, if you are hesitating to ask by voice, you can send a chat. In the chat, I will be reading out from the chat. Thank you for being with us. I'm now going to stop the meeting now. End the meeting, and tomorrow again back morning we have the lecture. So it will be again very interesting to listen Muralidhar sir also. He'll be talking about how communications, control and coordination like hormones will work. That will be very interesting concept he'll be talking to us. Thank you for being with us, and I will now end the meeting for all and all. Thank you.